You're about to die, but first you must save others who will also die. This was the contract that plague doctors signed with their cities in the 14th century. A document worth its weight in gold, but which in reality was a terminal assignment with a set date. Imagine wearing 15 kilos of waxed leather, a mask that transforms you into a monster, and entering a house where the stench of sickness is so strong that even the flies flee. Now imagine doing this every day, knowing that every patient you touch could be the one who will end your life. This was the most terrifying reality of medicine. And today you'll discover why these men accepted this pact with fate. But before understanding the doctor, you need to understand the hell where he worked. October 1347, port of Messina, Sicily. 12 Genoese galleys dock from the Black Sea. The few sailors still standing can barely tie the ropes. Those lying on the deck are already gravely ill in the sun. Black swellings the size of eggs burst from their necks. Port authorities try to isolate the ships. Too late. The fleas had already jumped from the sick rats to the living ones, and from the living ones to the stevedores. Within 3 days, the entire port was in agony. Within a week, the city. Within a month, Sicily. Within 6 months, Europe was on its knees. The plague didn't walk, it ran. It followed the trade routes like an invisible merchant. Where there was gold and spices, there was soon widespread calamity. Florence, the jewel of the Renaissance, lost 60% of its population in 4 months. 60%. Imagine your city now. Wipe out more than half the people you know. Within 4 months, Paris became an open-air burial ground. The living couldn't enter the deceased fast enough. They created a new profession, the body counter. A man who went from house to house, not to save but to mark how many had passed during the night. He carried white chalk. A cross on the door meant illness inside. 2 crosses, all departed, could burn the house down. In London, King Edward I lost his 14-year-old daughter. Princess Joan died on her way to her wedding. Neither royalty could be saved, nor could gold buy a cure. The plague was democratic in its cruelty. Pope Clement VI was surrounded by enormous bonfires day and night. He believed the fire would purify the air. He survived, but had to consecrate the Rhone River so human remains could be thrown into it when the cemeteries filled up. An entire river turned into a grave, but the real collapse wasn't the loss of life, it was the living. Parents abandoned sick children. Wives fled feverish husbands. Priests refused to administer last rites. The social fabric was unraveling. In Pistoia, Italy, church bells were banned because the constant sound of funerals was driving the survivors mad. The cities had a terrible odor like open wounds. Without farmers, there was no food. Without merchants, there was no medicine. Without gravediggers, there were no burials. Animals ate remains in the streets. Dogs were exterminated because they fed on human tissue and then attacked the living. Survivors described the smell. It wasn't just the passing. It was the passing mixed with burning vinegar, rotting grass, human waste, boiling tar, everything they threw over the bodies to try to contain the pestilence. The air became so thick that birds fell dead in mid-flight. And in the midst of this apocalypse, someone had to enter the marked houses. Someone had to touch the putrid swellings. Someone had to pretend they knew what they were doing as the world ended. This someone was given a name that was both a title and a curse: Plague Doctor. Now answer me, why the hell would anyone accept this job? The answer lies in a 1348 parchment found in the archives of Orvieto, Italy. The contract offered the doctor Matteo Angelo 50 gold florins per month. For comparison, a craftsman earned 2 florins. It was a 2-year salary paid monthly. But there was a clause written in fine print: the said doctor may not leave the city until the pestilence ceases under penalty of death. To sign was to choose between 2 executions, the plague or the gallows. Some volunteered. Giovan de Ventura, a doctor in Pavia, left it on record: I accept because my family has passed. I have nothing left to lose but my soul, and that is already damned by what I've seen. Others were charlatans, men with no medical training who donned the mask because no one else wanted it. In desperate times, anyone who knew how to bleed a vein became a doctor. But most were forced. Entire cities hunted doctors like they hunted deserters. In 1349, the city of Barcelona sent mercenaries to kidnap a doctor from Lleida. He was dragged in chains for 80 kilometers. Upon arrival, they gave him 2 options: wear the robe or be burned as a heretic for abandoning suffering Christians. He donned the robe. And what was that robe? The transformation began with the feet, knee-high leather boots sewn with beeswax to seal any gaps. Then came thick leather pants smeared with mutton tallow. The smell was already unbearable, and they hadn't even reached the patient yet. The coat was the main piece, tanned oxide, dipped in hot wax 7 times until it became as hard as armor. It weighed 8 kilos dry. Wet with sweat and rain, it weighed 15. The sleeves were sewn to the shoulders. Once donned, the doctor couldn't remove it alone. It was a walking coffin. The gloves came up to the elbows, held in place by leather straps. The fingers were too thick for delicate work. Many doctors couldn't even hold a lancet properly. They had to learn everything over again, as if they were blacksmith's gauntlets trying to perform surgery. But nothing compared to the mask. Charles Delors, chief physician to 3 French kings, perfected the macabre design in 1619, but primitive versions already existed during the First Plague. The beak was 20 centimeters long. Inside it were rose petals, mint, myrrh, camphor, cloves, 2 pieces of sponge soaked in vinegar, and, believe it or not, sometimes dried viper droppings. All this to filter the poisoned air. The eyes were covered with red glass. Yes, red. They believed the color scarlet repelled evil. The problem? The glass fogged up with breath within minutes. The doctor worked nearly blind, guided more by smell than sight. The wide-brimmed hat completed the look. It wasn't aesthetic. It was for identification from a distance. People needed to know the practitioner was approaching, so they had time to lock themselves in their homes or flee. But the most important tool wasn't worn, it was carried. The 1.5-meter-long wooden staff, the extension of the doctor's arm. With it, the doctor lifted blankets, examined swellings, and pushed away desperate family members. Some staffs had an hourglass carved on top. The symbol was clear. Time is running out. The first time a doctor donned the full suit, many felt extremely nauseous into their own mask. The heat was suffocating, the weight crushing, the vision blurred. The smell of herbs mixed with their own sour sweat created constant nausea, and they hadn't even entered an infected house yet. A doctor in Milan wrote, "When I first saw myself in the mirror, I didn't recognize a man. I saw a demon. Children ran away screaming. Dogs barked until their throats bled. I was the monster mothers used to scare disobedient children. And worst of all, they were right to be afraid. But the real terror wasn't donning the suit. It was knowing that once you were dressed, you crossed an invisible line. On this side, the healthy avoided you. On the other side, the dying awaited you. And between the two worlds, only you, alone inside 15 kg of leather, breathing through viper droppings, walking toward the next swollen gland about to burst. Let's follow 24 hours in the life of one of these men. Based on real diaries, this is the journey of Guido Marchetti, plague doctor in Venice, 1348.4 a.m. Guido wakes before the roosters, not out of discipline, but because cold sweat has soaked his sheets again, the same nightmare. He, without the mask, surrounded by sick people, feels the growths growing on his own neck. He touches his throat, still nothing. He kneels. He prays, "Our Father who art in heaven, if you are still looking at this hell." He drinks his first dose of pure vinegar, mixed with crushed garlic. It burns his throat, but they say it protects. They say many things. He eats stale bread with honey. Honey is a luxury, but plague doctors can afford it. After all, what other use will gold have if he dies tomorrow? He chews rue leaves, another useless protection. He washes his face with urine. Yes, urine. Ammonia supposedly repels the plague. AM, time to put on his armor. First, he rubs amber oil all over his body, then powder made from ground bones. His skin needs to be dry, or the friction wounds make every step torture. His leather pants, his boots, he ties each strap as if tying a shroud. His coat weighs on his shoulders like the cross of Christ. Finally, the mask. The world shrinks to 2 blurry red circles. AM, first house. The door has 3 crosses, a large family. He knocks with a bat. An old woman opens her sunken eyes as if she hadn't slept in days. "My granddaughter," she whispers. She's only 7 years old. The girl is unrecognizable. Her face is swollen, purple, and a large swelling on her neck the size of a man's fist is throbbing. Guido brings the stick closer, pokes it lightly, and the girl screams. Fluid and blood are running down the pillow. "Bleeding," he whispers through the mask. His voice is muffled, monstrous. He takes the lancet from his bag. The thick gloves make everything difficult. He cuts the veins from the child's arm. The blood flows black and thick. The grandmother cries, "Is it working?" Guido doesn't answer. He knows the girl will be gone before noon. He applies a paste of pigeon droppings mixed with mustard to the swelling. The smell permeates even the herbs in the mask. The girl is delirious, calling for her mother. Her mother is in the next room, passed away for 2 days. No one has the courage to tell the child. In the morning, fifth house in the morning, a rich man, a spice merchant, offers a bag of gold to be cured. Guido accepts the gold, not because of its value, but because to refuse would be admit there's no hope. The treatment for the rich is different. Ground pearls mixed with rose water, emeralds crushed in wine, a unicorn horn amulet, actually a narwhal tooth, all theater. The man dies, coughing blood while holding the bag of emeralds. Noon, Guido skips lunch. Impossible to eat with the smell of sickness permeating his nostrils. He drinks more vinegar. The herbs in the mask have already lost their aroma, replaced by the sweet odor of decay. Monday afternoon, the worst call, a monastery, 20 infected monks. They flagellated themselves to atone for the sins of the world, believing this would stop the plague. The wounds from the lashing became infected. Now swellings are growing on their open backs. Guido enters the chapel. The monks agonize on the floor, still trying to pray. One of them grabs his boot. "Forgive me, Father." The monk raves, mistaking the doctor for a confessor. I have sinned so much." Guido drives him away with his staff. He's not a priest. He can't absolve anyone, not even himself. PM, a noble house. The lady is in the early stages, still lucid, still hopeful. Guido prescribes the full treatment. Half a liter of bloodletting, suction cups on her back to suck out the poison, an enema of bull's bile with spurts of crushed dried toad. She asks, "Will I survive, doctor?" Guido has learned to answer without lying or destroying hope. "Make the necessary peace, madam, 7 p.m. solo, last house." Guido can barely climb the stairs. His legs tremble with exhaustion. Sweat runs down his back, mixing with the oil and talcum powder into a disgusting paste. The house is silent, very silent. He opens the bedroom door. An entire family perished. Father, mother, 3 children, gone for days. The rats have already begun their work. He is forced to check each body, looking for signs of life. The youngest son, perhaps 4 years old, still holds a wooden horse. Guido leaves the house, marks 5 crosses on the door. Stricken house, burn everything. PM, finally home. He needs help taking off his costume. His assistant, a 12-year-old boy, the only one brave or desperate enough for the job. He cuts the leather straps. The mask comes off last. The fresh air is like being born again. Guido washes himself with boiling vinegar, scrubbing until his skin bleeds. His assistant burns sage and rosemary. Sacred smoke to purify. More superstition, 10 p.m. Alone in his room, Guido opens his diary. The flickering candle writes October 18th. I visited 23 homes, 41 sick people, 19 already departed when I arrived. Of the 22 I treated, maybe 2 will survive. Maybe. The 7-year-old girl died in my arms. I don't know her name. I forgot to ask. I'm losing the ability to see them as people. They're just walking illnesses now. God forgive me if you're still listening. At 11 p.m. before bed, Guido performs the final ritual, examining his own body, feeling his neck, armpits, and groin. He looks for the telltale swelling. Nothing today. Today he survived. But tomorrow he will wake up at 4, put on the 15 kilos of leather, breathe through viper droppings, and return to hell. Because that is the pact, that is the price. This is the 24-hour life that repeats itself until the plague ends or until it ends you. But the worst part wasn't death always lurking. The worst part was dying alone after living alone, because being a plague doctor meant giving up something more valuable than life. It meant giving up being human. Giovanni da Padua's contract, signed in 1348, had a clause that defined his sentence. The said doctor will live in the house designated by the commune, no less than 500 paces from the center. He will not be allowed to receive visitors. He will not be allowed to go out to markets, churches, or taverns. You can't touch a healthy person without the council's permission. 500 steps. The exact distance between being a doctor and being a leper. Imagine returning home after a day among the dead and having no one waiting for you. Simone Martelli, a doctor in Florence, had a wife and 3 children. The day he first donned the mask, he was forced to move. His family stayed in their old house. He could see them from the window of his new home. Every Sunday at 3 p.m. they waved from afar. The children grew up without hugging their father. The wife grew old without kissing her husband. Simone wrote, "My youngest son doesn't recognize me without the mask. When I take it off, he cries. To him, the monster with the beak is his father. The man underneath is a stranger." Food was left at the door in baskets. Payment in gold was washed in vinegar before being touched. Even the letters they wrote were smoked over sulfur before being read. Some doctors developed a system, leaving messages in glass bottles sealed with wax. The family responded in kind. Bottled conversations, quarantined love. Pietro of Florence tried to circumvent the isolation. He secretly visited his wife one August night. The neighbors found out. The punishment was exemplary. His wife was branded with a hot iron on her forehead. A pestilential Pietro never saw her again. She died of shame before the plague reached her. Isolation destroyed the mind as much as the plague destroyed the body. Many doctors began talking to themselves, not out of madness, but out of necessity. The human voice, even their own, was the only sound besides the screams of the dying. Jacques Yvlon developed an elaborate routine. Every night he pretended to have guests for dinner. He set the table for 6, poured wine into empty glasses, talked to chairs, toasted ghosts. The assistant who discovered this fled in terror, spreading the word that the doctor had gone mad. Perhaps he was right, but there was something worse than loneliness. It was knowing that his family suffered because of him. Doctors' children were expelled from schools. Their wives were avoided in the market. "Don't touch her," they whispered. "She is the wife of a plague crow." Marco Villani saw his 12-year-old daughter stoned by other children. They called her the daughter of calamity. She returned home with her face bleeding, asking her father why he wouldn't stop being a doctor. Marco had no answer. The contract didn't allow him to stop. Some tried. Robert of Venice fled after 15 months. He was hunted like a rabid dog. When they found him, hiding in a monastery 50 kilometers away, the punishment was public. First, they burned his medical instruments in the square. Then they forced him to don his mask one last time. Finally, they locked him in a house with 3 terminally ill plague patients without food, water, or tools. It took him 4 days to die. They say that in the end, no one knew who was the patient and who was the doctor. The passing of these isolated men came in many forms. Some drank until they lost consciousness. Wine was the only companion that didn't flee. Others simply stopped eating, slowly wasting away. There were those who deliberately became careless, removing their gloves too early, getting too close to the lesions. But the most common end was the cruelest, the plague. When the first symptoms appeared, the fever, the chills, the subtle swelling in the groin, the doctor knew exactly what lay ahead. He had seen hundreds die. He knew every stage, every hour of agony. Francesco of Pistoia described his own final moments in meticulous detail. Day 1, a fever of 39 degrees C, an unbearable headache. Day 2, a swelling the size of a knot in his right armpit. I apply the useless garlic poultice. Day 3, the swelling grows to the size of a goose egg. Fluid begins to leak. The smell is ironically familiar. He died alone on the 5th day. His assistant found his remains 3 days later. He was still clutching the feather. The last word in the diary, almost illegible, was forgiveness. The dead doctors were not given funerals. They were burned with their clothes, their instruments, their diaries, their ashes thrown into the river, without a tombstone, without a mass, without memory, as if they had never existed. Families inherited the gold when there was gold, but they also inherited the curse. Widow of the afflicted was the mark that lasted generations. Children changed their names, wives moved to another city. They tried to forget that they had once loved a man who chose to embrace death, but isolation had a final refinement of cruelty. Even in death, the plague doctor died as he had lived, completely alone, knowing exactly what was happening to his body and helpless to do anything to stop it. But as they agonized alone out there in the streets, opinion of them divided like a festering wound. For every person who saw them as saviors, there was another who swore they were demons. The plague doctor was not just a man. He was a mirror onto which each person projected their deepest terrors. Let's start with the Church. Pope Clement VI officially declared the plague a divine punishment for humanity's sins. But what about doctors? What place did they occupy in this heavenly judgment? The Bishop of Winchester was categorical. These men with their mouths are blasphemers. They try to heal what God sent to punish. Every bloodletting is an affront to the Lord. Every poultice a rebellion against his will. In contrast, the abbot of Cluny argued, they are instruments of divine mercy like the Good Samaritan. They do not abandon the afflicted. Their failure to heal is not heresy. It is humility before the mystery of God. The truth is, not even the church itself knew what to think. In Avignon, priests blessed doctors before they left for work. In Rome, they were excommunicated for practicing diabolical arts, but it was in the streets that the division became violent. Milan, March 1349. The physician Carlotto de Benedetti is surrounded by an angry mob. The accusation was that he deliberately spread the plague to earn more money. The proof was that he had visited 3 healthy houses that days later reported infected people. He smears the doors with pus, a woman shouted. I saw it with my own eyes. He carries vials of pestilence in his bags, a blacksmith accused. Carlotto tried to explain that he had visited the houses because there were already sick people. But the crowd didn't want logic. They wanted someone to blame. They ripped off his mask and tore his clothes. When they found the vials of ointments, it was the final test. They dragged him away, forced him to drink his own medicine, half a liter of bull's blood mixed with mercury. He vomited blood for hours before dying. The crowd celebrated. 3 days later, the plague killed half the lynchers, but there was another extreme. In Siena, the physician Angelo Turura was venerated as a living saint. When he died of the plague, people invaded his isolated home not to loot but to collect relics. They cut off pieces of his mask and tore strips from his leather coat. A woman kept his severed finger in a vial, swearing it cured her son's fever. The church had to intervene, declaring that venerating a plague doctor was idolatry, to no avail. For decades, people made pilgrimages to the site where Angelo was burned, collecting ashes they believed to be miraculous. Letters from the time reveal the collective schizophrenia. A mother writes, Dr. Corvo saved my daughter. He drained the bubo with such delicacy that she didn't even cry. He's an angel disguised as a demon. A father writes the same day in the same town. The damned doctor killed my son with his bloodletting. I saw death in his red eyes when he came in. He's a demon disguised as an angel. There were also conspiracy theories. In Strasbourg, rumors circulated that plague doctors were disguised Jews poisoning Christians. In Barcelona, they said they were infiltrated Muslims avenging the Crusades. In Paris, they swore they were devil worshippers, making pacts in exchange for immunity. A pamphlet from the time, preserved in Nuremberg, said, How to recognize a false plague doctor. 1. He never gets sick. Proof of a demonic pact. 2. He charges Judas's medal with gold. 3. He wears a mask to hide his horns. 4. His staff is a necromancer's rod. 5. He visits healthy homes to sow death. The most tragic were the documented cases of gratitude turning to hatred. Giovan de Luca saved by miracle or luck a nobleman's only son. The family covered him in gold, called him savior, and organized a mass in his honor. 2 months later, the same nobleman's daughter died of the plague. The same family that had exalted him now accused him of having exchanged the girl's life for the boy's through witchcraft. Giovan was tried by an impromptu tribunal. His defense showed the scars of buboes on his own body, proof that he too was vulnerable, too human. To no avail. He was sentenced to be buried alive with 3 plague victims. The perverse logic. If he was innocent, God would protect him. If he was guilty, the plague would devour him. He died on the 3rd day, screaming his innocence. But the most revealing document is the diary of an anonymous doctor from Venice. Today a child called me Mr. Death, not maliciously, but as someone stating a fact. To her I am as natural as winter or famine. Neither hero nor villain, just a season. A season that brings death. I prefer that to hatred or veneration. At least the child was honest. I do not save. I do not kill. I am merely present when the inevitable happens. I am the medical witness to the apocalypse, nothing more. And perhaps this was the hardest truth to accept, that the plague doctor was neither a savior nor an executioner. He was just a man dressed in leather and despair, trying to do something, anything, as the world ended. A man who would be remembered not for what he cured, but for the fear he inspired. Not for the living he saved, but for the dead he could not prevent. And yet from this monumental failure, something none of them could have imagined was born. the future of modern medicine. Because sometimes you have to fail completely to question everything you think you know. Consider the irony. The beak mask, created to filter non-existent miasmas with viper droppings, was the first piece of personal protective equipment in medical history. It didn't work as intended, but it established a revolutionary principle, creating a physical barrier between the doctor and the disease. 700 years later, doctors facing COVID-19 donned N95 masks, disposable aprons, and face shields. Technology has changed. The principle was born with those desperate men smelling dried feces while Europe rotted. But the true revolution lay in the diaries, obsessive, detailed, meticulous. Plague doctors were the first to systematically document a pandemic. Gentile Foligno wrote in 1348, "The disease kills in 5 days for most, 3 days in the young, 7 in the old. It always begins with fever, then buboes, then delirium, then death." It seems obvious, doesn't it? Before them, diseases were random divine punishments. They began to see patterns, timing, progressions. Unknowingly, they were inventing epidemiology. Guide Scoliac, the Pope's physician, made an observation that would change everything. He wrote, "I realize that those who care for the sick get sick. Those who run away don't. Is the disease transmitted by air, by touch, by sight?" He didn't have the answer, but he asked the right question. The question that 300 years later would lead to the germ theory of disease. The treatments were absurd, yes, but the method was beginning to emerge. They tested, observed, recorded. Bloodletting doesn't work. Noted. Vinegar doesn't protect, recorded. Cupping is useless, documented. Every failure was a piece of data, every death a lesson. Unwittingly, they were creating the scientific method. Hypothesis, test, observation, conclusion. An anonymous doctor in Prague wrote something prophetic in 1350. If we could see the evil that causes the plague, perhaps we could combat it. But we fight blindly against an invisible enemy. One day, when we have eyes to see the invisible, we will win. 350 years later, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek would invent the microscope. 400 years later, Alexandre Yersin would identify the bacterium Inia pestis. 500 years later, antibiotics would cure in days what killed in hours. But something deeper was happening. The plague forced medicine out of the universities and into the streets. Before, doctors were philosophers who quoted Galen and Aristotle. Then they had to soil their hands with pus, blood, and shit. Medicine ceased to be philosophy. It became practice. Municipal contracts were another milestone. For the first time, public health became the responsibility of the state. Cities paid doctors to treat the poor. Unthinkable before the plague. Today we call this the public health system. It arose from the desperation of medieval mayors trying to maintain some order while half the population died. Quarantine 2, Venice 1377. Suspicious ships would remain anchored for 40 days, 40 giorni before docking. They didn't know about the incubation period, but they sensed that time revealed the sick. Today, quarantine is a common word. It was invented by terrified men seeing ships full of corpses, and there were precious accidental discoveries. Plague doctors noticed that gravediggers rarely became ill after a while. An observation noted without understanding. Today we know it was the immunized survivors, the first documented observation of acquired immunity. Even the failure of treatments taught, if bloodletting killed faster, perhaps draining blood was bad. If hydrated patients lasted longer, perhaps fluids were important. If wounds cleaned with wine infected less, perhaps alcohol had special properties. Every correct intuition was buried in 1,000 superstitions, but it was there waiting for someone to sift the gold from the rubbish, the most extraordinary. They began to question ancient medical authority. A physician in Montpellier wrote in 1349, "Galen never saw the plague. Hippocrates never drained a bubo, because we blindly follow men who never faced this evil." Medical blasphemy. Questioning the classics was academic heresy. But when you see 10 people die following Galen, you begin to doubt Galen. The plague killed medical dogma, and from the corpse of dogma was born something radical. The idea that medicine should be based on observation, not authority, on evidence, not tradition. But the deeper legacy was another. Plague doctors proved that it was possible to be a doctor. When there was no cure, that the medical duty existed even in the face of guaranteed failure. That accompanying death when life cannot be brought was also medicine. 700 years later, ICU doctors in COVID do the same. Oncologists with terminal patients do the same. Palliative care does the same. Medicine is not just about healing, it is about being present. The plague doctors in their utter failure taught this, and so those men who saved almost no one ended up saving the future. Every useless bloodletting was a step toward antibiotics. Every ridiculous mask was the ancestor of modern PPE. Every obsessive diary was the seed of medical literature. They planted it without knowing, they died without seeing it. But every time a doctor dons a lab coat, washes their hands, writes a chart, documents a case, questions a treatment, there is an echo of those desperate men of the 14th century. Men who failed at everything except one thing. They kept trying even though they knew it was futile. And sometimes, only sometimes, it is from the most complete failure that the greatest revolution is born. March 2020, Bergamo, Italy. A doctor wears a white jumpsuit, N95 mask, face shield, enters a crowded ICU. Mechanical ventilators whistle where rattles would once have sounded. The principle is the same, a barrier between him and death. 700 years of evolution. Same fear. Dr. Li Wenliang, Wuhan, China, tried to warn about a strange virus. They called her an alarmist. He died treating patients with COVID-19, alone in an ICU, far from her family, exactly as Guido Marquette died in Venice. 1348. New York nurses sleeping in parking lots to avoid contaminating their families. Brazilian doctors recording farewell messages before each shift. Italian professionals choosing who would receive the last respirator. Did everything change? Nothing changed. The question remains the same. Would you enter a room knowing you might not leave? Would you embrace the death of others at the risk of your own? Would you sign this contract? Because here is the brutal truth. There will always be a next one plague. It may not be bacterial, it may be viral, fungal, or something we haven't even imagined yet, but it will come. And when you come, someone will have to wear the mask, whether it's leather with a beak or polypropylene with a filter. Someone will have to enter where everyone else flees. Someone will have to touch the untouchable. Someone will have to fail 1,000 times until the accumulated failure gives rise to healing. The Black Death doctors were not heroes, they were humans, doing the unthinkable because someone had to. They didn't know they were changing history. They thought they were just surviving another day. Maybe this is how all courage works, not with grand heroic gestures, but with the daily decision to continue when it would be easier to run away. So here's my final question. It's not rhetorical. I want you to stop and really think, knowing that you will die, knowing that you will not cure anyone, knowing that you will be hated, feared, isolated, knowing that your family will suffer, knowing that you will die alone in a bed soaked in sweat and pus, knowing all this, would you sign the contract because someone signed it? In the 14th century, in the 20th century, in the 20th century. And thanks to these crazy people, these damned people, these blessed crazy people, who said yes when every instinct screamed no, you are alive to watch this video. Think about that for a second. The answer you gave to this question says a lot about who you are. I really want to know. Tell me in the comments, would you sign this contract? But more importantly, why? What would make you say yes or no? You know, this video was a heavy journey. I know. If you've made it this far, you're not the type to shy away from difficult truths. He's exactly the kind of person I need by my side. Because every week I bring stories that most people would rather forget. Stories that bother you, that make you think, that don't let you sleep in the same way. Last week was about the London body collectors. Next week, well, you'll find out if you're here. But believe me, it's even more disturbing than this. Do it like this. Watch this video appear on the screen. It's about surgeries without anesthesia in the 16th century. Patients conscious while amputating legs. Screams that crossed blocks. Click on it now, but first subscribe to the channel here. Not because I'm asking, but because you know you need these stories. These truths that no one else has the courage to tell. Activate the bell too, not to help me, but to make sure you don't miss out when I release something that will change the way you see the world. And that friend of yours, do you know which one? He who loves macabre stories, who sends audio at dawn talking about conspiracy theories, who philosophizes about life and death. Send this video to him now, not tomorrow, now. Because you two need to talk about this, about plague doctors, about courage, about what your choice would be. Share it in your stories too, not with cute text. Just say, would you subscribe and mark the channel gold? Leave the crowd intrigued. Let them discover what you're talking about, because that's what we do here. We don't tell bedtime stories. We raise the dead. We bring the past bleeding into the present, and we ask the questions that no one wants to answer. Have you done your part today? Watched, thought, felt. Now leave your mark. Comment, subscribe, share, and click on that video on the screen. Go, I'll see you on the other side. Until then, remember, knowledge is the only light against the darkness, and sometimes the darkness looks back me.